So therefore now you see, where's she heading?
Panama.
Yeah, right. And where did she start? Chile. No wonder we have
That's
a
right.
temple on either end of her travels. Is this just a coincidence? I don't think so. I think this is just sheer, Lenora Armstrong is, and all of this is what's happening down there. And so here we are now, Panama Canal. I happen to have the bounty on a 70-foot Desco Marine powerboat, which was an albacore boat that we had built up in Jacksonville to take us through the Panama Canal. I mean, I went down like Martha, went down Florida all the way down to Panama, went through the canal, and went up to Mexico. And our anchor broke in Cologne, which is on the Atlantic side. So I sat there until the engineers could come down to fix our hydraulics on this brand new boat. So I saw all the boat and all the traffic and everything coming through the Panama Canal for, day after day. You can't even imagine. Now, we are talking here, the Panama Canal opened in 1914. Brand new. I know it because we've got it in our history train in the museum. And so the Panama Canal is really a miracle. It is really quite shallow. I just want to share with you what distresses me right now, and we said it when we sat there. All these big ships from China and from everywhere, crates that 10 stories high built, on these boats, and it was just unbelievable. And if ever somebody decides to put a drone into the Panama Canal and blow it up at the end, the middle, and that, what will happen to the world economy? You can't even imagine it. Because when you see the traffic that goes through it, and I want you to know there are over a dozen Chinese warships lined up at the Panama Canal as we're speaking, because 60 Minutes was there and reported it. But the Panama Canal at that time was really an amazing opportunity. And Peter, my late husband, his mother left from Seattle, no, from the East Coast, I'm sorry, Washington, D.C., through the Panama Canal to serve in China. So the Panama Canal was really, for those who were global travelers, was really the only way that they would travel, and Martha Rudolph certainly was one of them. So now here we are in Panama. And so you want somebody to read it, or
I'll read it if you want.
if you don't mind, go ahead.
Sure. We must give great attention to the Republic of Panama. From that point, the Occident and the Orient find each other united through the Panama Canal. That place will become very important in the future. The teachings once established there will unite the East and the West, the North and the South.
See?
Tablets of the Valley Plan.
See what I mean? No wonder she went there, right? So she followed, she read it, she said, I'm coming, right? And so this is October 25th, 1919. The canal opened 5 years earlier. So it's really basically quite new at that time, isn't it? So now she goes, okay, let me just bring it back here. And now you notice she's starting to go back home again, right? So here she is now, 1919, in Cambridge Springs in November 15th. I wonder if the Baha'is ever bought this home or not. I don't know. But boy, if it's still there, they really should. And no matter what's on there, they need to tear the old house down and rebuild this house and make it a replica of her, like we did with the shrine of the house of the Baal. Ah, think about this. Think about this. Here she did. You know, she went around the world, takes the gets leaves from the divine plan, scoots all the way down, goes across the Andes, camps all the way back up. And what does she do the next day when she arrives? The next day, you know what? And I trust me, I would say, you know what? Can I just have a day off? Oh, no, no, not Martha. This is the discipline and conviction. She goes down to a local high school to begin what? To learn Spanish because she just came back from Central South America. And she said, man, I've got to learn Spanish. Right? Okay. You want to read that one again too, Burton?
Sure. Thou art really a herald of the kingdom, a harbinger of the covenant. Thou art self-sacrificing and showing kindness to all the peoples of the earth. Thou art now sowing a seed that in the long run will yield thousands of harvests. Thou art now planting a tree that shall everlastingly put forth leaves, blossoms, and fruit, and whose shadow shall grow in magnitude day by day.
Imagine something being said like that about her. So now she spends 3 weeks teaching. She gets right back out again. All right, learn Spanish. Man, I can do this, right? Now Martha spent 3 weeks teaching in Mexico and Guatemala in 1921. And you know what's going to happen in 1921, right?
Yeah, so Grandma Baha leaves this world at the end of November. So,
mm-hmm. Right? So she is there right in the middle of that trauma. So she now is there in Mexico and in Guatemala. And of course, this is where we have it now, Abdu'l Baha's passing, right? Which must have been unthinkable to her because just like Shoghi Effendi, all those what we call Abdu'l Baha'is, you know, that's all they've ever known was working with Abdu'l Baha. And yes, they met some of the people who still knew Abdu'l, you know, but still knew Baha'u'llah. But Abdu'l Baha traveled. He knew the West, you know, he'd been to Europe and he'd been to the United States and all of that. And so this is here a letter to National Teaching Committee from Martha Root. There's one beautiful way to tell him and the people of the world how much we love Abdu'l Baha. How is it? It is to try to love as he loved, try to serve as he served, and sacrifice as he sacrificed, be happy as he was happy. You know, it's a wonderful, sweet recommendation, right? So in his will and testament, Abdu'l Baha named Shoghi Effendi the guardian and the head of the faith. And when you read about the guardian, one of the reasons he goes to Switzerland, we withdraws and the Greatest Holy League takes over for a while, is because Shoghi Effendi, as you recall, he had what we call pink eye, right? So he couldn't travel with Abdu'l Baha and had to go back home again. And he met a few of the pilgrims that Abdu'l Baha met, but he was always in the background, and he was quite young, and he didn't have the relationships that Abdu'l Baha had with all the pilgrims from around the world. And it was very hard. And so when you now have this young guardian, and Shoghi Effendi was only 24 years old in 21. Nevertheless, Martha and most of the Baha'is were steadfast and obedient. They knew the covenant. They shifted their focus were absolutely, and thank God that's how it went, right? Were absolutely steadfast to the call of Abdu'l Baha, because then in 22, November 3rd, I must work hard to finish things here, as from now on, separately, is that what it said? Oh, see, I said the cause of Baha'u'llah, right? Serve only the cause of Baha'u'llah. You know, what does she say? As the universal said, leave your mark behind, Martha. You must leave your mark behind. And all of us sitting here, we're getting the same message. So don't think, oh, well, that was then and this is now, and we're not Martha. Yep, well, the message is the same. And because Abdu'l Baha said, oh, that I could travel, even though on foot, and in the utmost poverty, and raise the call of Ya Baha'u'llah in cities, villages, mountains, deserts, and oceans to promote the divine teachings of this, or this, alas, I cannot do. How intensely I deplore it, that ye may achieve it. That's us today. That was Martha Root then, and don't think for 1 minute that call, you may need to go on foot through your neighborhood. He didn't say Rio de Janeiro or Paris. I'm so sorry. But he calls all the villages, the cities, and mountains, and deserts, and oceans, and above everywhere. The house right now is pointing out neighborhoods. So therefore, your mark is on foot, right, going right where he's asking us. So, Martha Root. So this is now when we, so this is kind of takes us now coming up from her travels into the later part now, right? But we're starting off in 23. And this is why today we're celebrating her departure in 2023, right? So we're getting into that part now. But she will leave us in 1939. And let's make sure if you are still there and alive, that in 1939 we're going to remember and have this remarkable story. So she now says, the Tablet of the Divine, she said, the aim of my life, and fulfill those tablets absolutely. Never, not a little bit here, and now I do the best I can. I've got this, and I got that, and my husband, my wife, my children, my mother, you know what I'm saying? Okay. So here she is now in 1923. Hey, Seattle. Finally, we at least get there today, right? So here she is today. Oops, sorry, back up. Here she is today, March 22nd, 1923. I've been down the pier, and she goes on the Kagamaru, and she sails out of Seattle, bound for Yokohama, Japan. Martha was the only American on this boat. Now, first of all, the boats, especially the Japanese boats, the Japanese have a superstition. I know that for a fact because I've been in that position where a decision had to be made. They say it is bad luck to have a woman on your boat. They don't like to have a woman on the boat. And because they feel it attracts bad karma, those were the days then, because it was still the way in my day. And when I went onto one of the fishing boats, they wouldn't let me on. No woman on the boat, right? And so it is a long-standing, and the fact that she was the only American on the boat. And there's some wonderful stories, and I can read out to you. She has shipped her typewriter, her little projector, and 240 slides. That's what she has with her. And those poor Japanese, every night they got to listen to Martha Root one way or another, giving her a presentation, right? Now, so this kind of is jumping, and we can go because not, most of you are in different parts, right? So we're going to keep it generic because I can go just into Seattle a little bit more, and I can read out something as we still have a little time, what happened in Seattle, right? And the place where she was and how amazing it was. And I can tell you one thing is this wonderful photograph. And I think, I think he has in here. Maybe not. Yeah, because here she now arrives back. And guess who's standing there? She arrives because look who's already there. There's Martha. Agnes Alexander. And who's standing there? Yeah, go Seattle. So Ida Finch is already in 23. She's already in Japan. This is remarkable because she's widowed. She's a nanny. And of course, Martha and Agnes were just There you have the Mr. Takshira right there, standing next to them. And so the arrival in Tokyo is at 7 p.m. Oh, at 6 o'clock. Now, do you know this little Japanese rock and roll boat to Yokohama? Get it? Travel, seasick, get it? Worn out, the bunk. I didn't imagine what the bunk. You've got to remember, I want to also make mention, she already has cancer. This woman did not trust doctors, and she knew she had cancer, but she knew her time was short, but she didn't stop. And she arrives at 6 o'clock, and what does she do at 7 o'clock? There you go. 7 o'clock, 1 hour. That's not even enough to get your suitcase off the boat. But she had it all ready to go because she knew she was going to be busy. And here you go. So a Pittsburgh girl tailed by Tokyo police as red. What? Okay, here we go. Let's just talk about this one. Oops. So take a look here. Miss Martha Root, former editor of the Society and Religious section of the Post, was tailed by the Tokyo police on suspicion of being a communist. Now, this was very not unusual, that because when you look at the early days, they thought that we sounded a little Marxist, the principles of the Baha'i faith and the faith in different places in different cities had to deal with being quote unquote, are these communists? What is this new cult? They couldn't quite figure this out. And she was, so the police today visited the Tokyo home of Miss Alexander, a relative of the famous family of missionaries and traders in Hawaii, who is entertaining Miss Root. They questioned the servants at great lengths. Miss Root today appealed to the United States Embassy for protection. She had no intention of offending Japanese officials, she declared, and hopes to succeed in explaining to them why Baha'ism does not menace Japan politically or religiously. So not only does she cross mountains on donkeys and oceans and snow, and then she finally gets after God knows what and so on. And then what does she do? She looks down the cops knocking on her door. So when we say sacrifice, she knew what we're talking about. This is very scary when you're in a foreign country. And Agnes Alexander, fortunately, had been there for a long time. And Hawaii, having had a high percentage of Japanese in the sugar plantation, all of that, pineapple and so on. And the early Japanese all went to Hawaii because they had married into Hawaii. They 1/3 of the Hawaiian Islands today is Japanese. There has always been this Japanese Hawaiian relationship, and because Agnes Alexander was a well-known family in Hawaii, so they were able to resolve that pretty quick because they knew all about the Alexanders. Okay. Anyway, and I was hoping that now you notice that she's in Tokyo, and Yokohama is not too far. It's about an hour outside of Tokyo, and so even though she arrives in Yokohama, but so now we're carrying on, and she's in with Ida Finch and Agnes Alexander and so on. But what the plan is, China what the cause of Baha'u'llah must merge Abdu'l-Baha. Where is that holy sanctified Baha'i to become the teacher of China? Why, you don't tell Martha Root twice. Because she knew about it, she went there with the intent, and she knew that this is where she's going to stop over in Tokyo. And then she leaves Japan there, as you can see. And now she goes and takes the boat once again through the China Sea. And she arrives in, That's the second. And here she is now in Japan. Let's look at the map. So Tokyo to Beijing. Now it looks like okay, go through the China Sea, right? And you know you have Vietnam on one side, and you have Korea on the other side. And you think, because I've been to China, I've been to Vietnam too, and I've been to South Korea, and I've been to Tokyo. So you think, oh, it doesn't look very far up into Beijing. Let me tell you, it is big. It is far. It is a long way to go to Beijing. And by the way, my late husband Peter's sister Anne is born in Beijing. It was known at that time Peking, right? Okay. So here we are now, of course, famous Chinese theater, and she gets introduced to the culture of China, and she begins to in Beijing and or Peking at that time to start teaching the faith. And knowing her, she probably made absolutely sure she would go out in the villages, but she really becomes familiar, and there she is. You know, look at that smile. She's totally happy and content. She's feeling comfortable in her skin. She's staying probably outside her little place where she's staying, and it just warms my heart to see her, because a letter she said, I love China. You will find the Chinese perfectly beautiful souls and wonderful happy here. I mean, she just kind of went home, and she died and went home. You know what I mean? She just absolutely adores it. And then here it is in the Honolulu Advertiser, 1923, September 1. Here comes now that famous Tokyo fire. Flames sweep world's largest city when earthquake and tidal waves strike Japan. So this is an important place because Ida Finch had a temporary work visa in Tokyo as a nanny to a family. And as soon as this happened, the U.S. Embassy and the Japanese, they immediately asked all the Americans to leave the country. Agnes Alexander, because she'd been there for a long time, so Agnes Alexander pleaded residency, and she was granted that residency. Poor Ida Finch did not pass that sniff test because she'd been there quite recently. And so she was put on the boat and back to Seattle. And so let's just see what let me just go back and says, Tokyo fell victim to a violent earthquake just before noon today. 2/3 of Tokyo burned when thousands of wood-fueled cooking fires spread flames through the city. Thousands have lost their lives. And the body count continues to rise. Nearly 1 million people are homeless. Scarcely anything can be found to eat. Let me see. Spokesman for the International Red Cross promised relief supplies to be airlifted as soon as partitions permit. And this was written by Count Taniguchi, who met with military officials today to set out security zones in the area that it seriously affected the quake. Now you've got to realize Agnes Alexander is in the middle of that, and Ida Finch is caught in the middle of that. You can't imagine this, right? I mean, 1 million people are homeless, nothing to eat. Oh my God. This is really unbelievable. And she only just got there. This is September 23, right? She arrives there in April, and by 23, this horrible thing happens. Now, Agnes and her sister Mary, in September, December, joined Martha for teaching in China. What do you know? So that is Mary there, and I'm not aware that Mary Alexander ever became a Baha'i, but she obviously, China was a huge curiosity, and she obviously visited her sister in Japan. And so Agnes wanted to join Martha, and the sister probably said, I'll come along. This sounds like a great travel plan, right? So they then go all the way. So you see there how they make it by train, I'm assuming, from Yanti all the way up to Beijing. The countryside was pretty barren, and I'm sure traveling was pretty rough. And you know, and you can see she goes from Shanghai. I've been to Shanghai. I've been to Nanking, and then she goes all the way up. You see, she follows there the Yellow Sea, which is very interesting. And say, man, there's no end to China. Shall we get an amen on that? China is big. And in 1923, it is really big. You know what I mean? And don't mind my light-hearted comments there. But while she is in China, Martha received a letter from the greatest holy leaf that vaulted her to the skies. 23, because what happened between 21 and 23? That's right. The Guardian is in Switzerland, and the greatest holy leaf is in charge, and she writes to Martha Root in China. See what I'm saying? I'm just taking it into a different perspective here. And so, whatever it was, she inspired her to, then she goes south, she goes down to Hong Kong, and then to Vietnam. But you notice she does quite a bit of ocean travel, right? And to me, I had forgotten that she actually had been in Vietnam. Why would I forget that? But you know, I just want to briefly only mention it, but I've been the mother of Hanoi. Why? Because JT and I became sick in Hanoi, and his doctor and his nurse became Baha'i. The whole family became Baha'is. They became the first Baha'is in Hanoi, and therefore JT and I introduced the faith to Hanoi. My small little some contribution, right? But now that I see Martha Root going to Vietnam, I'm really excited about that because that's really very cool. I didn't know she went to that. And yet these are the kind of vessels that Martha Root traveled on, obviously steam, right? And so, and then 24, okay? So she's there, and she is now back in China. She went through, we know that she went through Vietnam and Hong Kong and so on. And then, as you notice now in 24, June to November, she goes to Australia. And she ends up by sea in Melbourne. This is where the sadness of it all sort of begins, because she is at this point riddled with cancer. Okay, so let's keep going. And here she is, Martha with the Baha'is of Melbourne. Mother done. I mean, this is just so exciting. And so the faith already had been, been nurtured with a divine plan. Clara and Haidan went to Australia, and then they become they then begin to open the faith in Australia, and there they are. So now what does she do? She goes all the way across Australia. You know, Australia is not a small place, 1,900 miles. But I can see in the center there, it has a railroad. So she obviously did it by train, right? And I think I have to ask Dwayne, because you notice it always has these little speaker buttons, and I think he has an audio to go with it. And so we're going to ask him if we can, get the audio working in this slide presentation. And then there she is now in Perth, right? So here now, there's Mother and Hyde and Clara Dunn right in the background there. And I mean, this is really an incredible picture. And I we always remind the Seattleites, you know, like we don't do it with pride, we don't do it with arrogance, we do it with humbleness, but we always say, remember, it all started in Seattle. So, and when they had their anniversary, just the other day, they wanted to actually connect with Seattle because they knew that's where Hyde done. Clara lived in Walla Walla, and Hyde, uh, Hershey chocolate salesman. Okay, and here we go, father and mother Dunn. There they are. Distinguished men. Both were from Britain. Distinguished couple. When they first met, actually, Hyde, uh, his wife was very ill, but he was still married, and she had gone through a divorce. But when Abdu'l Baha came to in 1912, by then his wife had passed away, and Clara made it down with Ida Finch to meet when Abdu'l Baha was in Oakland, right, San Francisco. And this is where they met again for the first time, and then they got married, and then they went to Australia in 1918. Okay, little sidetrack there. So now we are in Australia, in Perth, and basically, this is basically what you're looking at, the scenery, the surrounding, and this is great. So what happened at that time period now in the 20s? The Bobsey cut. Remember the 1920s, the gay 1920s, right? And you see the girls, Charleston and so on. With the Charleston came the Bobsey cut. And she was so proud because she got a Bobsey cut. And wherever she went, ooh la la, she had a Bobsey cut. And she called that her glamour picture. And I think this is very adorable and it's very cute and she just looks lovely. So from one moment to the next, I get it. That is really a cute picture. So now she goes from Australia. They're the Duns, right? Australia. And Martha attributed all her success in Australia, in New Zealand to the Duns, forever self-effacing. So she goes now to New Zealand, Auckland, and we were there at the very first international SED conference, and that was a wonderful memory. Auckland is a beautiful, beautiful city, and there you have it. It looks like Little England. I couldn't believe it. It's got the mountains, it's got the sea, it's got lots of sheep, and everybody eats lamb. You know, it's sort of very much like the UK. Okay, now here is Martha and three Kiwis: Effie Baker, Margaret Stevenson, and Lilia Stevenson, September of 24. So, Effie Baker is who? Isn't she, Burton confirmed this, because isn't she the photographer later on that takes the pictures in the Dawnbreaker, or am I wrong?
I think so, but I was going to you guys to ask Stephen about that.
Yeah, we'll come back to this, right? Because remind us on Thursday to ask about Effie Baker. I'm almost sure of it, but anyway, there we have the picture. Martha on the right, and Effie Baker and Margaret Stevenson and Lilia Stevenson. So now, this is now in July 24. The words of Baha'u'llah about an international language went out 3,000 miles. She now goes on broadcasting. July 1924, broadcast Martha talk on the faith on July 20th, 1924, all the way across Australia. Because she could. She knew how. She knew how to walk into radio stations and into mayor's offices, into the newspapers' offices with her editor's passport and her connections. She was able to do that. And then eventually what happens is, she must have the stomach, an iron stomach, because now she goes from Adelaide in 1924 all the way to what? Cape Town, South Africa. Really? I'm going, wrong way. Home is the other way. No, she's going down to the Cape. Oh my gosh. Cape Town, Africa. Now I want to say something about that. This is what